Facepalm America. I'm Beowulf Rockland. FacepalmAmerica.com is, as always, the place you can go to listen to past episodes, connect with us on social media, and find out more information about the show. And if you listen to the show, you know that kids being put in danger because of bad systems created by adults is a regular theme of the program. And that's why we're going to be talking to our next guest. Celeste Edmunds is Executive Director of the Christmas Box International, an organization that helps kids in the child welfare system, and she's the author of Garbage Bag Girl. Celeste, welcome to Facepalm America. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
What does the Christmas Box International do, and how did you become involved in
it? So we have shelter cares, emergency shelter cares that take children through the age of 18, which allows us to keep siblings together, the most unique part of our shelter care program. They stay with us 2 weeks to a month, and it really allows the state and everyone involved in a child's decision on where they're going to go time to decide, hey, is there a safety plan that can be developed so the child or children can return home, which statistically is the best place for them to be? Or is there a family member that can step up and take them, or do they need to go in the foster care system? And is there a family, the right family, available for them, or do they need to stay in shelter longer? So we keep about 1,000 siblings together every year between our 3 shelters. And really it is, if I had to pick a favorite part, it would be that, because I didn't have that. I lost my siblings. And when everything's taken from you, all your belongings, your uncles, your aunts, your grandparents, all you have left are your siblings that give you any connection at all to where you came from.
So really, you do everything that you can to keep families together.
Yeah. So we're super fortunate to be able to do that and to offer that. And the other thing unique about our shelter programs is that we also really try to bring all services under one roof to limit transition. So dental care, med management, which has become a very big thing because most foster children are on some sort of psychotropic medication now. We call that mood management. And then childcare visits. So we really education. We try to bring all that under one roof. Again, it's really about a concept of a village raising children rather than a system raising children. And it's a great public-private partnership between the community, nonprofit, and government that has worked well for about 28 years. We've served over 155,000 children, which is a lot to get your head around. I tell people that'll fill Madison Square Garden more than 7 times. And Richard Paul Evans, my co-author and the founder of our Christmas Box charity, and I always say this would be the one job you'd be okay if you could get out of, because we didn't need it anymore. But unfortunately, the need grows more every year, and so do the type of children that need to be placed. Their behavioral issues seem to be getting much bigger, and which makes them even more difficult to place into a family.
And you describe it in Garbage Bag Girl, but what was your path towards this as a child? How did your experiences make it clear to you personally that how horrible and difficult a system this is, and why it needed additional help in the form of the organization that you guys have created?
Yeah. So in my book, which is a warning, it's a bit graphic, especially in the beginning. You do get to a happy ending if you just push through, but it is really, for me, about the most difficult of the years I was in child welfare, which were about 3 of them from age 7 to 9, where the state intervened. And no one would argue that there probably shouldn't have been intervention. But at the time I was in child welfare in the early 80s, our system was designed with less prevention than we have today. We do have states that have in-home assistance. And so a child doesn't necessarily just get removed without, it being evaluated that there's a program to help them in the home. Utah's gotten very, very good at doing that. But that wasn't an option for me. So I started living in drug rehabilitation centers, couches of family, really being put in situations that created sexual and physical and mental abuse at an extreme level. And eventually I was adopted, but at the age of 9, but unfortunately it was a very, very abusive family. And I ran away when I was 15, and I did end up, spoiler alert, being adopted at the age of 26 as an adult, which is very unique for sure. And why my book is dedicated to my mom, Carly, for, stepping up and harboring a minor and going way out of the system and not getting, any compensation. She was a single mom with 2 other teenage girls. She definitely did not need me. And I was a lot. And oftentimes foster kids are. Everything we're getting dealt, we dish back out. And it really does take very strong people to see through that and cut through that and just kind of get right to the meat of what's going on and have those real conversations that my mom says, home is where they have to keep you. It's not an option for you to do something wrong and get kicked out. We'll figure it out. And she pushed through, made me finish school, which was not a thing in my family. And then it just kind of, put me on a trajectory that I don't have to drink myself to death. I can go back to school. I can make good decisions for myself, even though no one else made them for me. And when Richard Paul Evans wrote a little green book called The Christmas Box 30 years ago, it is about the loss of a child. And at that time, Utah was one of many states being sued by the National Center for Youth Law in California for the mistreatment of children. And we had kids dying in the foster care system. And he made a lot of money off of that book, and he and his wife decided they wanted to give back. They didn't know how, but they knew it should be child-centric. So we basically held a child welfare conference and just asked, what is the single best thing we can do for Utah's abused children? If this catastrophe is happening and we have this guy and his wife willing to put in a bunch of money, what's the one thing we can do? And we really determined that kids were just being placed without any place for them to go, to just slow that process down, bring the services under one roof, and take more time. We had a police officer, when we asked him, what are you going to do with this child whose hair had just been visibly ripped out of his head? And he said, if we had your shelter built, that's where I would take him. But honestly, I will take this child to the first person that answers the phone. And I think, unfortunately, that's really what happens in a lot of states. It's a complicated system. It's an overworked system. It's a very underpaid system. And so my core belief is that children aren't supposed to be raised by a system. They're supposed to be raised by a community and by people who love them. And so that's really what we try to do is rally this concept that we're all doing this together. You're going to pay financially for these kids on the onset, or you're going to pay for them later. From just a strict financial perspective, it's the right thing to do. But if you can't get your head around that, get your head around the fact that there's a cost somewhere.
Yeah. Somebody has to pay the piper at some point, because the impact that going through this system has for young people is going to be very difficult, and they're going to have costs as a result through social services of various kinds that society will have to pick up. If you decide that you don't want that early on, if you don't want to intervene at the beginning of that process, then the piper will be paid down the line.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree wholeheartedly. We all know that's a thing, but I think there's this interesting mentality that you hear there's children in child welfare, right? Oh, there's 500,000 kids in foster care. There's always about 500,000 kids in foster care. That doesn't ever change nationwide. But I think there's kind of a belief that means someone's taking care of them. That means someone else is taking care of them. And the reality is there's gaps. There's gaps. And policy is important. I'm not anti-policy, but I think that the system changes take about one system change can take a decade.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody has time for that. That's a lot of kids in the middle. And so I think as individuals and communities, it's much easier to jump on board with the things we get to make changes in very much every day. Reach out. There's one thing the U.S. is pretty good at is creating nonprofits. We have a lot of nonprofits. In Utah alone, we're one of the most philanthropic, and we have over 10,000 just in our state. And it's because nonprofits fill the gap.
Right.
Where public policy just it isn't going to make more room for, and they need your resources. That's where, in my opinion, the best efforts can be made to help fill gaps in a system that's not going to fix. I mean, there's so much that's changed since the early 80s of me being in it, and there's still a lot that hasn't even moved. And I think, how in 30 years is there like no movement in some of these areas? Yeah. But right, so, they have all the rules and every year the political spectrum changes, and that means child welfare changes with it, just like any other system.
Right.
And kids are stuck in the middle of it. So our belief as a nonprofit is that there's an ability to really step up and fill gaps where you can create these partnerships with government who, like it or not, are mandated to make these decisions for children. Nobody's changing that anytime soon. Mm-hmm. So take nonprofits, take community, and really make a significant difference where you can quite quickly.
I'm wondering what you think a better structure would be for dealing with situations like these, because obviously you're describing a system with a lot of gaps. You're there on the ground. Yeah. I'm so glad that you can be, but that can't take care of everything. Is there, if you could design a system in this country or across states or in a state that would deal with this in a better, more comprehensive way, in which fewer kids would fall between the cracks, and your job would, maybe not altogether, but for the most part, go away, what would that be?
Well, I'm a big fan of prevention. Mm-hmm. I feel like the crisis side, there's always going to be that, especially I think about where child welfare started, and in the 70s, when really child welfare laws and mandating people to report child abuse, which didn't happen to the mid 70s. So we have to realize that's fairly new, you know what I mean, in terms of how long that's been happening. Child welfare was really about changing the mindset of generational abuse. Kids were being abused because their parents abused them, and then their parents before them abused them, and there was this generational concept. Today, that's not very probable because people know better. Where we're at today is between mental health and substance abuse issues. Those are so great that I don't know how to create a system in which that doesn't happen, because those each have their own system issues that are driving the parents' inability to take care of themselves and their children. Housing is always in a crisis. I mean, you have some kids that get removed because parents don't have a physical house.
Right.
And they should. Like, I get that. But I have to question what is in the best interest of a child to give them a physical structure house, but take them away from their biological family, and because you can't offer them housing.
Right. Like
it's backwards that way. Right. So then the kiddos, they get thrown into this system because parents don't have a house, but no one can help them get into a house. So those are like bigger systemic issues that I think are really hard to get your head around. But what I do know, because Utah's made a lot of shifts in how we do it, is now our human services departments and teams are not about removing kids as much as they are, what team can we put into the home to help educate and create safety and create environment